ultimate irony of avoidant psychology is that the very behavior that drives them away, pursuit, emotional intensity, and desperate attempts to maintain connection, is exactly what they'll eventually display when you completely reject them and remove yourself from their emotional landscape. When you stop being available for their intermittent reinforcement games and genuinely withdraw your emotional investment, you trigger their deepest attachment fears and force them to experience the pursuit, anxiety they typically create in others. The psychological reversal, why rejection activates their pursuit system. Avoidants are psychological competitors who are unconsciously programmed to pursue what appears to be moving away from them while losing interest in what's readily available. Throughout your relationship, your consistent emotional availability allowed them to maintain control over the connection while taking your presence for granted. When you genuinely reject them and withdraw your emotional investment, you trigger their competitive instincts and force them to experience the vulnerability they've spent their lives avoiding. The psychological mechanism at work involves the sudden activation of their attachment system when faced with genuine threat of permanent loss. While they can comfortably maintain distance when they know you're emotionally available and hoping for their return, your complete rejection eliminates their sense of control and forces them to confront the possibility that they've lost something valuable forever. Your rejection also triggers what researchers call reactance theory, the psychological tendency to want something more intensely when it becomes unavailable or forbidden. When you're pursuing them, they experience psychological pressure that triggers their avoidant defenses. However, when you reject them and remove all pressure, they often experience the absence of that pressure as loss and begin to crave what they previously found suffocating. The competitive aspect of their psychology becomes activated when they realize they're no longer winning the relationship game. Avoidants derive unconscious satisfaction from being the less invested partner who maintains control over relationship dynamics. When you reject them and demonstrate that you're no longer competing for their attention, they often feel compelled to restore their sense of desirability and importance. Your rejection also forces them to confront their own emotional needs without the buffer of managing your emotional reactions. When you stop providing emotional intensity for them to react against, they're left alone with their own feelings about the loss, often discovering emotional investment they didn't realize they had. The timing aspect is crucial. Avoidants typically expect their ex-partners to remain emotionally available indefinitely while they explore their independence. Your rejection disrupts this expectation and forces them to confront the possibility that their window for return might be closing or already closed. Most importantly, your rejection threatens their carefully constructed narrative about being emotionally independent and not needing anyone. When someone they expected to remain available permanently withdraws, it challenges their self-concept and forces them to examine whether they might actually need the connection they've been rejecting. The fear of abandonment that drives avoidant behavior typically remains dormant while they feel in control of relationship dynamics. Your rejection activates these fears by removing their sense of control and forcing them to experience genuine uncertainty about their ability to maintain connection when they want it. The strategic implementation. How to reject them effectively. Effective rejection of an avoidant partner requires a complete psychological and practical withdrawal that communicates your disinterest without appearing manipulative or strategic. The rejection must be genuine rather than performed, based on authentic recognition that they cannot meet your needs, rather than tactical maneuvering designed to trigger their pursuit. Complete communication cutoff is essential for effective rejection. This means no responses to their messages, no acknowledgement of their attempts at contact, and no engagement with their social media or mutual friends about them. Your silence must be total and sustained to communicate that you've moved beyond interest in maintaining any form of connection. The rejection must extend to emotional availability as well as practical contact. This means you genuinely stop caring about their well-being, stop wondering about their life circumstances, and stop investing mental energy in analyzing their behavior or motivations. True rejection requires emotional disengagement, not just behavioral avoidance. Your rejection should include visible investment in your own life and happiness that demonstrates you're building something positive rather than simply avoiding them. Social media posts about new activities, achievements, and relationships communicate that you're moving forward rather than waiting for their return or wallowing in relationship loss. The timing of your rejection often determines its effectiveness. Rejecting them during their typical return window, 6 to 18 months post-breakup, when they might be experiencing regret and considering reconnection, often has maximum psychological impact because it disrupts their expected timeline and control over reunion dynamics. Your rejection must be sustained over extended periods to be effective. Temporary withdrawal, followed by renewed availability, teaches them that your rejection isn't serious and that they can wait out your distance until you become accessible again. Sustained rejection over months or years is necessary to trigger genuine pursuit behavior. The rejection should include dating other people and building romantic connections that demonstrate your availability for relationships with people who can meet your emotional needs. Knowing that you're offering to others what you're no longer willing to offer them often triggers intense jealousy and pursuit behavior. Most importantly, your rejection must be authentic rather than strategic. If you're rejecting them to manipulate their behavior or trigger their pursuit, they'll likely sense the manipulation and remain confident in their ability to regain control when convenient. Genuine rejection based on recognition that they cannot meet your needs is much more psychologically powerful. The panic response. What happens when they realize you're gone? When avoidants realize that your rejection is genuine and permanent, rather than temporary emotional distance, they often experience what can only be described as panic as their attachment system fully activates and they confront the reality of losing their secure base permanently. This panic manifests in behaviors that directly contradict their usual emotional distance and control. The initial panic often involves frantic attempts to re-establish contact through multiple channels: texting, calling, social media, mutual friends, or even showing up at your home or workplace. This desperate communication represents a complete reversal of their usual communication patterns and demonstrates their genuine distress about losing access to you. They may begin monitoring your social media obsessively, analyzing your posts for signs of your emotional state and evidence of whether you're truly moving on or might still be available for reconnection. This monitoring behavior contradicts their usual indifference to your online presence and reveals their genuine anxiety about losing you permanently. The panic often includes reaching out to mutual friends to gather information about your well-being, dating status, and feelings about them. They may pump friends for information about whether you mention them, seem sad about the breakup, or appear to be moving on permanently. This information seeking represents unprecedented interest in your emotional state. Physical symptoms of anxiety often emerge during their panic response. Sleep disturbances, appetite changes, difficulty concentrating, and general restlessness that they cannot attribute to other life circumstances. These symptoms force them to confront the physical reality of attachment loss that they've spent their lives avoiding. They may begin idealizing your relationship and focusing obsessively on positive memories while minimizing or forgetting the emotional demands that originally drove them away. This idealization process represents their mind's attempt to reconstruct the connection they've lost and motivate themselves to pursue reunion. The panic response often includes promises of change, declarations of newfound appreciation, and assurances that they now understand what they lost. However, these promises are typically motivated by attachment panic rather than genuine emotional development, making them unreliable predictors of actual behavioral change. They may begin engaging in behaviors they previously avoided, expressing emotions directly, making future plans that include you, or demonstrating the emotional availability they couldn't provide during the relationship. This temporary emotional availability is usually motivated by fear of loss rather than authentic emotional growth. The competitive aspect of their panic often emerges when they learn you're dating other people. The possibility that someone else might claim what they took for granted triggers possessive responses that contradict their usual indifference to your romantic life. The pursuit phase, when they start chasing you. When the panic response fails to re-establish contact and they realize that your rejection is sustained and serious, many avoidants enter a pursuit phase where they actively chase the connection they previously took for granted. This phase represents a complete reversal of typical relationship dynamics and often reveals emotional capacity they never demonstrated during the actual relationship. The pursuit typically begins with increased communication attempts that escalate in frequency and emotional intensity. They may progress from casual messages to lengthy emails detailing their feelings, from practical contact attempts to emotional appeals, and from indirect communication through friends to direct confrontation about your relationship status. They often begin offering everything you previously requested from them: emotional availability, future planning, public acknowledgement of the relationship, and commitment to addressing their avoidant patterns. This sudden availability of everything you wanted often feels surreal after months or years of emotional distance and minimal investment. Grand romantic gestures may emerge during this phase as they attempt to demonstrate the depth of their feelings and commitment to change. These gestures often exceed anything they provided during the actual relationship and represent their attempt to prove that your rejection has motivated genuine transformation. They may begin therapy, self-help work, or other forms of personal development and communicate their efforts to you as evidence of their commitment to change. While this growth work might be genuine, it's often motivated by desire to regain access to you rather than authentic commitment to personal development. The pursuit phase often includes detailed analysis of what went wrong in your relationship and elaborate plans for how things would be different if you gave them another chance. This analysis typically focuses on their newfound understanding of your needs and their commitment to meeting them consistently. They may begin public displays of affection and appreciation that they avoided during your relationship, social media posts about missing you, public declarations of their feelings, or other behaviors that acknowledge the relationship's importance in ways they previously refused to do. The intensity of their pursuit often escalates over time as they become more desperate to re-establish connection and control over the relationship dynamic. This escalation can become overwhelming and may include behaviors that feel intrusive or boundary violating as they struggle with their lack of control. Their pursuit often includes attempts to negotiate or bargain for renewed contact, offering specific concessions or changes in exchange for another chance. This negotiation represents their attempt to regain control by making the reunion feel like a business transaction they can manage rather than an emotional vulnerability they must risk. The emotional intensity when they finally feel what you felt. Perhaps the most striking aspect of an avoidance response to genuine rejection is their sudden experience of the emotional intensity, anxiety, and desperation that they typically create in their partners. For the first time, they experience what it feels like to love someone who doesn't reciprocate their emotional investment and to desperately want connection with someone who remains unavailable. They begin to understand the anxiety of uncertain relationship status as they frantically analyze your behavior for signs of your feelings while receiving no reassurance about where they stand with you. This uncertainty creates the same hypervigilance and emotional preoccupation that they typically trigger in their partners through their inconsistent behavior. The experience of loving someone who doesn't return their feelings forces them to confront their own capacity for emotional vulnerability and attachment. Many avoidants are genuinely surprised by the intensity of their feelings and their desperation to maintain connection with someone who has withdrawn from them. They often experience jealousy for the first time as they imagine you building connections with other people who can appreciate and reciprocate your emotional investment. This jealousy forces them to confront how much they value your love and attention when it's no longer freely available. The emotional intensity they experience often includes grief about lost opportunities, regret about their previous behavior, and genuine sadness about the possibility of losing you permanently. These emotions feel foreign and overwhelming to people who have spent their lives avoiding such vulnerability. They may experience what they previously dismissed as neediness in their partners, the desire for frequent contact, reassurance about your feelings, and confirmation that the connection still exists despite evidence to the contrary. This experience often creates empathy for your previous emotional needs that they couldn't understand or appreciate. The role reversal forces them to experience the humiliation and desperation of pursuing someone who doesn't reciprocate their interest. This experience often creates genuine understanding of how their previous behavior affected you and generates authentic remorse about the pain they caused. Their emotional intensity often includes fantasy, an idealization of you, and the relationship that mirrors the thought patterns they previously found annoying or suffocating in their partners. They begin to understand how someone can become preoccupied with thoughts of a person who doesn't return their emotional investment. The experience of emotional intensity without the ability to control or manage the other person's responses forces them to sit with vulnerability in ways they've never experienced. This vulnerability often triggers personal growth as they confront aspects of themselves they've spent their lives avoiding. The begging phase, when pride becomes secondary to need, when their pursuit efforts fail to restore contact and they realize that you're genuinely committed to rejecting their attempts at reconnection. Some avoidants enter what can only be described as a begging phase, where their need for connection overrides their pride and their carefully maintained image of emotional independence. The begging often begins with increasingly desperate communication that abandons their usual emotional distance and includes direct expressions of their feelings, explicit requests for another chance, and detailed explanations of how much they miss you and need you in their life. This emotional transparency contradicts everything they previously demonstrated about their communication style. They may begin pleading for minimal contact, asking for just one conversation, one meeting, or one chance to explain their feelings. This willingness to accept minimal connection represents a complete reversal from their previous preference for all or nothing relationship dynamics and demonstrates their desperation to maintain any form of access to you. The begging phase often includes acknowledgement of their previous mistakes and explicit apologies for their behavior that demonstrate unprecedented accountability for their impact on the relationship. These apologies often exceed anything they provided during the actual relationship and represent genuine recognition of their destructive patterns. They may begin offering to accept any terms or conditions you might set for renewed contact, demonstrating willingness to accommodate your needs and boundaries in ways they never showed during your relationship. This accommodation represents complete reversal of their usual need to control relationship terms and dynamics. Their begging often includes promises of permanent change and commitments to addressing their emotional limitations through therapy, personal growth work, or other forms of development. While these promises might be genuine, they're often motivated by desperation rather than authentic commitment to growth. The intensity of their begging can become overwhelming as they abandon their usual emotional regulation and express raw desperation about losing you permanently. This emotional display often feels surreal to former partners who remember their emotional distance and controlled responses to relationship stress. They may begin using mutual friends, family members, or other intermediaries to communicate their feelings and plead their case when direct communication fails. This use of third parties represents abandonment of their usual preference for handling relationships privately and independently. The begging phase often includes dramatic declarations about how losing you has changed their perspective on relationships, love, and emotional vulnerability. These declarations typically emphasize how much they've learned and grown through the experience of potential permanent loss. Their willingness to humiliate themselves through persistent pleading represents complete abandonment of the pride and emotional control that typically characterizes their relationship behavior. This humiliation demonstrates the depth of their attachment and their genuine panic about losing you forever. The timing factor, when this strategy works best, the effectiveness of rejecting an avoidant to trigger their pursuit depends heavily on timing, circumstances, and the authenticity of your rejection. Understanding when this approach is most likely to succeed helps you recognize optimal conditions while managing your expectations about outcomes. The strategy works best when implemented during their typical return window, 6 to 18 months post-breakup, when they're beginning to experience regret about their decision, but still expect you to be emotionally available for their return. Your rejection during this window disrupts their expected timeline and forces them to confront unexpected loss of control. Rejecting them when they're experiencing life stress, loneliness, or challenges that highlight the value of partnership often amplifies the impact because they're already in vulnerable emotional states that make your absence feel more acute. However, your rejection must be genuine rather than strategically timed manipulation. The approach works better when you have genuinely moved forward with your life and built fulfilling circumstances that don't depend on their presence. When your rejection is backed by obvious happiness and success without them, it challenges their assumptions about your emotional dependency and their importance in your life. Your romantic involvement with other people often accelerates their pursuit response because it forces them to confront the reality that they're replaceable and that their window for return might be permanently closed. The competitive aspect of their psychology typically intensifies when they realize others can access what they took for granted. The strategy is most effective when you maintain consistency over extended periods rather than implementing temporary rejection followed by renewed availability. Sustained rejection over months or years is necessary to trigger genuine attachment panic rather than temporary inconvenience they can wait out. The authenticity of your rejection significantly affects its impact. If you're rejecting them to manipulate their behavior while secretly hoping they'll pursue you, they'll likely sense the manipulation and remain confident in their ability to regain control when convenient. Genuine rejection, based on recognition that they cannot meet your needs, creates more powerful psychological impact. Your complete emotional unavailability, rather than just practical distance, often triggers stronger responses because it challenges their assumption that they maintain emotional importance in your life, even during separation. When they realize they've lost emotional access, as well as practical contact, their panic often intensifies. The presence of mutual friends or social connections who can observe your genuine happiness and forward movement often amplifies their pursuit response because external validation of your improved circumstances challenges their narrative about the relationship ending and their importance in your life. The risks and realities. What you need to know. While rejecting an avoidant can trigger their pursuit and potentially lead to their begging for your love, it's crucial to understand the risks, limitations, and realities of this approach to maintain realistic expectations and protect your emotional well-being throughout the process. The most important reality is that their pursuit, even if intense and seemingly genuine, doesn't guarantee they've developed the emotional capacity necessary for healthy partnership. Pursuit, motivated by attachment, panic often subsides once they feel secure in regaining your attention, potentially leading to return of their original avoidant patterns. Their begging and promises of change, while potentially sincere in the moment, are often motivated by desperation rather than authentic personal growth. The emotional intensity of potential loss can motivate temporary behavioral changes that don't represent lasting development of emotional availability and relationship skills. The approach requires genuine rejection rather than strategic manipulation, which means you must be prepared for the possibility that they won't pursue you and that your rejection will result in permanent separation. If you're not genuinely ready to lose them forever, this strategy may backfire and cause additional emotional pain. The pursuit behavior they display during their panic phase often doesn't predict their capacity for sustained emotional availability during actual relationship rebuilding. Many avoidants can temporarily access emotional intensity during crisis periods while remaining unable to maintain that availability during routine relationship dynamics. Their pursuit may include boundary-violating behaviors that become uncomfortable or even frightening as their desperation intensifies. You must be prepared to maintain firm boundaries even when their pursuit becomes overwhelming or intrusive. The emotional roller coaster of watching someone you loved experience the desperation you once felt can be emotionally challenging, even when you've moved forward. Seeing them vulnerable and pleading may trigger sympathy or renewed attachment that complicates your own healing process. Most importantly, your goal should be your own healing and happiness, rather than triggering their pursuit. The rejection should be authentic recognition that they cannot meet your needs, rather than strategic maneuvering designed to control their behavior or emotions. Understanding these dynamics empowers you to recognize when an avoidance pursuit represents genuine growth versus attachment panic, while protecting yourself from being manipulated by their temporary emotional intensity. Whether they pursue you or not, your rejection should be based on authentic recognition of your worth and refusal to accept treatment that doesn't honor your emotional needs and relationship requirements.